Right, so for the last 2 months, the 14 Pro Max has been my main device. I have many thoughts about it, so let's delve into it. Now you may be wondering, why have I taken so long to do the review on the 14 Pro Max? Well, frankly, I'm pretty lazy, but also of course, Apple's software this year has been a mess, and iOS 16 in particular was terrible with the 14 Pro Max at launch. There were bugs, there were battery issues, and so I did decide it's best I wait till Apple fixes that, and thankfully they have, before of course I properly review this device. So yeah, now the software's a lot more stable and the battery life thankfully has been great, so let's review this. So beginning with the design, this is a very familiar design. It's very similar to the iPhone 12 Pro Max, but there are some refinements I've appreciated. So for example, the thinner bezels, they look pretty nice, but also the island visually looks great because we've had a notch on the iPhone for years, and so this looks way more futuristic. And yeah, finally the iPhone looks modern on the front. Also, something pretty underrated in my opinion is the smaller earpiece. This is a pretty big change because in the past, I did occasionally find some fluff in the earpiece, which is not great. Thankfully, that's no longer the case because the slit is super small, so that of course, fluff can't even get inside in the first place. And yeah, there's been no effect in the call quality or the speaker quality because of this, so it's a very nice change. And finally, the space black finish looks fantastic. I still love it. This black rim with, of course, the grey back looks amazing, and I'm still in love with this. And honestly, I wish I was brave enough to rock this naked. Because yes, let's get to the cons of the design since I want to be fair with this, and that begins with the camera bump. So yeah, the camera bump on this is ginormous. It was already pretty big on the 13 Pro Max, but it's now properly massive on the 14 Pro Max. And don't get me wrong guys, I do appreciate the cameras on the 14 Pro Max, but I wish the camera bump was flush because now I have to constantly worry about breaking or scratching this, and I hate that I have to baby this. I also want to talk about the size and the weight. Now yes, I know I have the Pro Max, I should not be complaining about that. If I have issues, get the regular Pro, right? Well, here's the thing guys, there are Android phones on the market that give you the best of both worlds. You get the big display, but of course, with a size and weight that's actually manageable. I mean, off to the side, I have the S20 FE, which is a lot narrower, so of course I can reach both sides of the screen, which is pretty nice, and it's a lot lighter because of the aluminium shell, so of course you can have a big display and also have ergonomics in mind. And that's what Apple forgets with the 14 Pro Max, because for one, this is a very wide device, so of course reaching the other side isn't easy for my medium-sized hands. Also, the weight is not great because Apple's still using stainless steel with this, and so yes, I'm praying that titanium does come to the 15 Ultra, because if that's getting bigger, then we do need a weight reduction for the Pro Max. Also, do remember the stainless steel has a very glossy finish, so you get tons of fingerprints. I hate this. Give us matte titanium sides instead, something similar to the Apple Watch Ultra finish. I think that would look great. And since we are nitpicking, I do want to mention the cutouts on the iPhone 14 Pro Max are pretty visible when the display's off, and it kind of ruins the illusion that this is one cutout because obviously turning off the device, it's quite clear it's two cutouts. So yes, please Apple, do a better job of hiding that. I think it would look nicer visually. Now moving to the display on this, there are three main upgrades, and I'll be honest, I think the most underrated upgrades, the one that many don't talk about, is the best part about the display upgrades. And that of course is the 2000 nits of brightness. I still think this is better than the Island and the always on display because when I'm outdoors with previous iPhone models, I did struggle to read the display. Now with the 13 Pro Max, it was a lot better, but now with the 14 Pro Max, I can clearly see everything even when there's tons of sunlight. So yeah, I really do appreciate this change with the 14 Pro Max. However, I do want to mention you only get 2000 nits of brightness when the phone's in dark mode, because if the panel's mostly white, the panel would have to be lit up completely, which of course would obliterate the battery life. But of course in dark mode, the background pixels can be completely off, and the text is what's producing 2000 nits and giving you that insane brightness. And so because of that, this does remain at 2000 nits for prolonged use. And so yeah, this is a fantastic display upgrade for the 14 Pro Max. Now moving on to the always on display, you can see I do have this turned off. Let's turn on real quick. But yeah, basically I do like this a lot, I do like how it works, I do prefer this compared to Android's, but it does use up a ton of battery life. And frankly, I care more about battery life, so yes, I'm turning this off. And to be honest, I'm surprised it does use up a ton of battery life because this does have an LTPO 2.0 panel, which of course can go down to 1 Hz. And so I was expecting battery life to not be affected by the always on display, but that's not the case. It does use up a ton of battery life. And finally, let's talk about the island. Now, initially I was hating on the island because Apple simply did not do enough, but with 16.1, of course, developers now have the Live Activities API, so we've already seen developers use the island and actually give us features. So as you can see, I'm using an app called Lock Launcher, which basically gives you a dock permanently within the island, which is nice, and you can access apps anywhere. That's pretty awesome. Yes, there is a splash screen, as you can see, but honestly, it's pretty fast. And I also like the fact you can have information in the island at all times. So yeah, I'm starting to see the potential of this, and I'm happy that developers already are playing with this feature on the iPhone. I will say though that my previous point still stands in that Apple should be integrating this better into iOS. Notifications still come below the island, which makes no sense. It should be popping out of the island like, of course, calls do on the iPhone, and I'm hoping that iOS 17 can fix this and better integrate the island into iOS. Since ultimately the island's supposed to blend hardware and software, so of course, notifications not coming out of it, and it just being there doing nothing is pretty odd. So yeah, please Apple with iOS 17 do a better job and give us native integration for the island. Now getting to the cameras, I know many reviews focus on this aspect, but to be honest, I could care less about the cameras. I'm not a camera nerd. I just use my camera for B-roll and of course taking pictures of my family, so for that use, the iPhone has been fine. However, I do have some issues to report. So the first thing is focusing issues. So I noticed this when I was recording video on the iPhone, but of course, with a large sensor, the focusing distance is pretty tight. And so without macro modes, the focusing actually is not that good. And it does either take forever or of course, doesn't end up focusing, as you can see. And that's not great, especially when of course I'm doing close-ups on specific products during my B-roll. However, I will say the macro mode does a pretty good job at getting close-ups, and so it's not a huge issue, but of course, I'm hoping that with future versions of the 48 megapixel sensor, we do get focusing improvements. In fact, I believe Samsung had the same issue, but then gave us laser autofocus, which fixed the issue for the most part. So I'm hoping we see that with the 15 series. But another big issue I've seen is smart HDR. So Apple actually for the first time in a while did not give us any smart HDR improvements. It's exactly the same as the iPhone 13 series. And so I've noticed with darker skin tones, the iPhone does not do a perfect job. And I think the Pixel in this regards is a lot better. The same goes for HDR because in some shots, the sky's completely blown out. And so yeah, while the hardware on this device is pretty good, Apple's computational photography skills are a bit behind compared to the Pixel, so I'm hoping that Apple does resolve that with the 15 series. And yeah, I'll be honest guys, I know that Apple made a huge fuss about the first megapixel increase in years, but it honestly does not make that much of a difference. It's mostly the same as the 13 Pro Max, so don't expect a huge upgrade in the camera department. However, I will say I do appreciate Apple giving us the 2x telephoto back. This is great for portraits. Also, another pretty nice change is of course the front-facing camera getting autofocus. That was very much needed, and especially since I might record shorts with the front-facing camera on this, autofocus is a major upgrade. Now let's quickly touch on the performance, and as one expects, I've had no issues. A16 super fast, 6 gigs of RAM is plenty for multitasking, and I've never seen app reloads or crash in the background. And yeah, I've had a very good smooth experience with the 14 Pro Max. And I have seen some say the 14 Pro Maxes are overheating pretty quick. Thankfully, that's not been the case for me, though of course, I don't game on my device, so maybe that's the reason why, but of course, I do record video on this, 4K video for up to an hour sometimes, and I've had no overheating issues. It's much better cooling wise compared to previous iPhone models, and I'm glad Apple has made improvements in this aspect. Since previously with the 12 and 13 I did notice the phone would randomly overheat for no reason, and so yeah, the cooling improvements are legit, and I do appreciate it. Now let's touch on the battery life, because this was probably the biggest issue I initially faced. I was not happy with the battery life. It was a lot worse than the 13 Pro Max, and thankfully that might have been a software issue, because now at 16.1 this phone is just as good as my 13 Pro Max with the always on display off. Because yes, like I said, using the always on display on this is going to eat into battery life, and so if you want 13 Pro Max endurance, I would turn that off. And yeah, battery life has been fantastic for my use. Now of course it would have been nice if the battery life was actually better, but of course with a smaller battery inside, that was really not going to be the case. And yeah, overall I'm very happy that this does match the 13 Pro Max in this aspect. Right, let's talk about some final tidbits, and beginning with Face ID on this, it's really good. So in the past, Face ID has been reliable for me, but to be honest, I've had issues when I'm either at an awkward angle or of course the phone's too far away from my face. Thankfully that's no longer the case. I have not been inputting the passcode on this because it works at every angle I use. And yeah, I'm very happy with Face ID on this phone. It's just super reliable. And so yeah, while Apple did not mention this, I'm pretty sure that the Face ID components have been upgraded with the 14 Pro Max. Now of course, haptic feedback on this phone, as one does expect, is absolutely fantastic. I love the vibrations. It gives me a tingling feeling. That's pretty nice. Also, the speakers on this, oh my god, the speakers are incredible. I was surprised Apple managed to improve the speakers over the already impressive 13 Pro Max. And again, for watching content and listening to music, the speakers on this are fantastic. Mic quality has also been great, but we can put that to the test for you guys with a camera and mic test. So this is the footage from the 14 Pro Max. I hope the mic sounds pretty great, and the video footage looks fantastic with the autofocus on the front camera. Oh, I also have to mention the 5G speeds on this phone have surprisingly been great. Now in the past with the 13 Pro Max, I would rarely see 5G, it would always be 4G in my area, but now with the 14 Pro Max, I am constantly getting 5G with this phone. And yes, it could be my carrier, maybe they're improving things, but I think it's the better modem in this. And yeah, Qualcomm, you're doing a great job with your modems. Now just improve battery life when using 5G, because that does still use up a ton of juice. So yeah, that's about it guys. Overall very happy with the phone, and I think the updates have massively improved the experience. And by the way, software wise, I'm now seeing a lot less bugs. iOS 16 initially was a mess, but I'm glad to report that's no longer the case. So yes, if you have questions regarding the 14 Pro Max, let me know in the comments. And on that note, thank you for watching. Make sure to like and subscribe for the latest Apple news and rumours. And on that note, see ya peeps.